You cannot possibly be serious. Erica, that's not your responsibility, my father declared, his words slicing through the boardroom atmosphere like a blade. I sat up straighter, forcing my trembling hands to remain still as I met his stare from across the conference table. With complete respect, Dad, I responded in a measured tone. I wouldn't present this recommendation unless I was convinced it represented the optimal choice for our organization. His face grew stern, yet I remained unwavering. This was my opportunity, and I refused to let it escape my grasp. I am Erica Lundstrom, and I was 28 years old during these events. I was employed at my father's petroleum and natural gas corporation, Lundstrom Energy, a powerhouse in Houston's business landscape. Throughout my childhood, I understood this enterprise would shape our family's identity. It represented my father's greatest achievement and source of pride, the business empire he had constructed from nothing. However, while my elder brother Scott received preparation to take over the company, I remained perpetually relegated to the margins. My academic achievements and work ethic were irrelevant. My father never believed I had a place in this environment. Nevertheless, I was determined not to surrender. To gain his respect, I would need to battle for it. When I initially became part of Lundstrom Energy, I anticipated challenges. My father established clear boundaries from day one. My role was more of a favor than a requirement. You may enter the company, he stated while reclining in his executive chair, but don't anticipate special treatment simply because you're my child. Demonstrate your worth. At that time, I was 22, recently graduated with a business administration degree, and enthusiastic about learning. I welcomed starting from the lowest position. I preferred it that way. I was convinced that through sufficient effort, I could prove to my father that my presence wasn't solely due to my surname. I dedicated my initial months to absorbing every aspect of the company, from the demanding operations at our refineries to the critical negotiations in executive meetings. Yet regardless of my dedication, my older brother Scott's influence loomed over everything. Unlike my experience, Scott didn't begin at entry level. He received a senior management position immediately after completing business school, despite lacking hands-on experience. While I handled reports and observed mid-level managers, he participated in board discussions, making choices that would impact the company's future. The fact that half the executives questioned his credentials behind closed doors didn't seem to concern him. He was my father's favored son, and that provided all the confirmation he required. I worked late most evenings, studying financial documents and industry information, attempting to learn everything possible. The more knowledge I gained, the more obvious it became that Lundstrom Energy wasn't as invulnerable as my father and Scott believed. The petroleum industry was evolving, and our company was falling behind. We depended too heavily on deteriorating infrastructure and obsolete methods, disregarding the increasing demand for environmental responsibility and innovation. I raised this concern during a team meeting, proposing we dedicate more resources to renewable energy research. Renewables. Scott mocked, leaning back with an arrogant smile. This is petroleum and gas, Erica. You can't simply attach a solar panel to drilling equipment and consider it revolutionary. The room laughed, and I felt my face flush with embarrassment, but I maintained my position. I'm not suggesting we eliminate oil, I responded steadily, but the industry is transforming, and without adaptation, we'll lag behind competitors. We must consider our future. My father observed this interaction silently, his expression revealing nothing. When the meeting concluded, he said nothing to me, but later I discovered an email requesting a comprehensive report on renewable energy trends. It wasn't significant, but it marked the first time he acknowledged my suggestions. It represented a minor victory, and I cherished it. That email became my opportunity, a chance to prove my capabilities. I spent weeks gathering information, conducting market analysis, and interviewing industry professionals. Every available moment was devoted to that report. When I finally presented it to my father, my hands trembled slightly. He accepted it without much reaction, scanning the pages with a furrowed brow. "This is comprehensive," he eventually said, looking at me. "I'll examine it more closely and provide feedback." While not enthusiastic praise, it was sufficient encouragement. Weeks passed without communication. I convinced myself he had discarded the report among forgotten paperwork. However, I then overheard him referencing some of my suggestions during a board meeting. He didn't acknowledge my contribution, naturally, but the fact that he utilized my ideas felt like a significant breakthrough. For the first time, I sensed I had some influence at Lundstrom Energy. It wasn't substantial, but it was a beginning. I recognized I couldn't stop there. I needed to continue pushing, proving myself, and earning my position in a company never intended for someone like me. Over the following 6 years, I worked with intensity one hadn't thought humanly possible. Promotions came with difficulty. Every advancement required a struggle. While Scott effortlessly moved into new positions handed to him without effort, I had to fight for every opportunity, repeatedly demonstrating my worth. By age 25, I was managing small projects, overseeing budgets, and establishing my reputation among younger executives. The work itself wasn't the only challenge. I had to navigate the unwritten rules of a male-dominated field. Being both a woman and my father's daughter meant every error was amplified, every achievement minimized. However, I learned to let my accomplishments speak for themselves. By 28, I had secured a senior position in the operations division, supervising some of the company's most vital projects. While not the top position, it was close enough to envision. Meanwhile, Scott had done little to warrant his rapid promotion. His decisions were frequently short-sighted, prioritizing immediate profits over sustainable growth. The flaws in his leadership were becoming increasingly obvious, but my father either failed to notice or refused to acknowledge them. The power structure remained unchanged, until the day it didn't. That's where my narrative truly begins. The moment I finally confronted my father in that conference room for the first time, initiating a series of events that would transform everything. The atmosphere in the conference room was tense as I concluded presenting my proposal. My father sat at the table's head, arms folded, his expression impossible to read. Scott, however, appeared ready to lose his temper. "This is absurd," he burst out, striking his hand on the table. "You can't honestly believe Erica's suggestion surpasses mine." I refused to let his explosion disturb my composure. "This isn't about whose concept is superior, Scott," I stated calmly. "It's about what makes the most financial and strategic sense for our organization. Without this change now, we'll fall behind competitors." My father leaned forward, fixing me with an intimidating stare. "And you believe you understand better than all of us, Erica? Better than me?" For a moment, I wavered, feeling the pressure of his authority. But then I recalled the years I'd invested reaching this point, the countless hours I devoted to understanding every aspect of this company. I was no longer the naive 22-year-old who had just started. I was prepared for this moment. "Yes," I said, meeting his intense gaze. "In this situation, I do." The room became silent, tension so thick it could be cut with a knife. My father's jaw clenched as he slowly reclined in his chair, his piercing eyes focused on me. "We're finished here," he declared abruptly, his tone icy and definitive. "Everyone else may leave." Scott pushed back his chair, a smirk forming at his mouth's corner. "Good luck, little sister," he whispered as he passed me, his tone filled with condescension. I tightened my fists beneath the table but maintained a neutral expression, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. As the other executives departed, I remained seated, my heart racing. When the door closed, my father leaned forward, placing his elbows on the table. For an extended moment, he simply stared at me, the silence stretching uncomfortably. "Do you comprehend what you're requesting, Erica?" my father said, his voice sharper now, almost a growl. "Do you understand how it appears when you challenge me before the entire team?" I held firm, despite his tone sending chills down my spine. "Dad, with complete respect, within this building I'm not your daughter. I'm an executive at Lundstrom Energy. In this room, I care about the company, not pride or personal feelings." His eyes narrowed, and momentarily, I thought he might explode. Instead, he leaned back, shaking his head. "You believe this concerns ego?" he said, his voice quieter, but still filled with intensity. It's about understanding your position. I've constructed this company from nothing, and I won't allow you to undermine that with your need to prove something. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain composed. I'm not attempting to undermine you, I said, keeping my voice steady. I understand this company's importance to you. It means equally much to me. That's why I spoke up, because without adaptation, without forward thinking, everything you've built could be endangered. He studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he released a slow, measured sigh. You're bold, Erica. I'll acknowledge that. But boldness doesn't always equal wisdom. He stood, indicating the conversation was over. You've expressed your opinion. Now, let's see if you're as skilled at execution as you are at making presentations. As he left the room, I remained seated, my heart still pounding. This wasn't merely about gaining his approval, it was about proving to myself that I belonged here, that my ideas had value. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing. I wasn't retreating. Later that afternoon, I found myself across from Rebecca Morgan, one of the few women in senior leadership at Lonstrom Energy. Rebecca had always been someone I respected from a distance, intelligent, strategic, and respected in an industry that wasn't particularly welcoming to women. If anyone could understand my challenges, it was her. So, she said, reviewing my proposal, her perfectly manicured nails tapping lightly on the table. You're proposing we restructure the refineries and invest in renewables simultaneously. Bold, expensive, and necessary. The refineries are losing money due to inefficiencies, I replied. We can't sustain that. Regarding renewables, if we don't begin positioning ourselves now, we'll be playing catch-up in 10 years. She looked up at me, her expression unreadable. You're not incorrect, she said finally. This represents the forward thinking this company requires. But, Erica. I leaned forward, sensing an objection I wouldn't appreciate. This organization, she continued, lowering her voice slightly, isn't designed for women like us. You're intelligent, ambitious, and you've done your research. But that's not always sufficient here. Lonstrom Energy is an old boys network. You can present the best ideas in the room, and they'll still dismiss you if they feel threatened. I understand that, I said quietly. But if I don't advocate for this, who will? The numbers are clear. They can ignore me temporarily, but they can't ignore facts indefinitely. Rebecca nodded slowly, a small smile appearing at her lips' corner. You have courage, I'll give you that. And you're correct, this company needs change. If you want my advice, don't let them see you waver. Be relentless. It's exhausting, but it's the only approach. Her words lingered as I left the meeting. I knew Rebecca was right. This place wasn't built for women like us. But I was determined to remain, to prove I could navigate the maze and make my mark on Lonstrom Energy, regardless of the obstacles in my path. The following weeks were intense. I immersed myself in refining my proposal, incorporating Rebecca's suggestions, and preparing for the uphill battle I knew was approaching. Late nights at the office became routine, and the stack of coffee cups on my desk grew taller daily. I could feel the weight of the company's future on my shoulders, but I was determined not to let it overwhelm me. One evening, while examining market projections, there was a knock on my office door. I looked up to see Marcus Langston, one of our lead engineers, standing in the doorway with a tentative smile. Mind if I enter? He asked. Certainly, Marcus, I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. What brings you here so late? He sat down, glancing at the spreadsheets covering my desk. I've heard about your proposal, he began. Word travels. I wanted to say, I think you're onto something. I raised an eyebrow, surprised. You do? He nodded emphatically. Absolutely. The industry is transforming, and we can't continue operating the same old way. I've been developing some green technology initiatives independently, but they've never gained traction with upper management. Tell me more, I said, intrigued. We spent the next hour discussing his concepts, methods to reduce emissions, improve efficiency, even integrate renewable energy sources into our operations. For the first time in a long while, I felt genuinely excited. Here was someone who not only understood the challenges, but also shared my vision for the future. Why haven't you presented this to my father? I asked. He gave a rueful smile. Let's just say your dad isn't exactly open to change, especially when it comes from someone like me. Someone like you? A young engineer who's not part of the inner circle, he said, shrugging. But perhaps if we combined our efforts, they'd have to listen. I considered his words. That might just work. Over the following weeks, Marcus and I collaborated closely, merging our proposals into a comprehensive plan that addressed both the financial and technical aspects of modernization. Working with him was refreshing, his enthusiasm was infectious, and his insights were invaluable. One afternoon, as we concluded a meeting, he looked at me thoughtfully. Erica, you're different from most people here. Is that positive? I asked, smiling. It's very positive, he replied. You actually care about making a difference. I felt warmth spread through me. Thanks, Marcus. That means a lot. As our professional relationship developed, so did our personal connection. We began having coffee together, sharing stories about our lives outside work. He was easy to talk to, and before long, I found myself anticipating our conversations more than I cared to admit. But as things progressed, so did workplace challenges. My father remained skeptical, and my brother was openly hostile. At a family dinner one Sunday, my father barely acknowledged me, focusing all his attention on Scott's latest golf tournament victories rather than business matters. Did you see the proposal Erica's been working on? My mother asked, trying to include me in the conversation. My father waved his hand dismissively. It's ambitious but unrealistic. We have established methods that work. I felt a familiar pang of frustration. Dad, with all due respect, clinging to old methods won't sustain us long term. Scott smirked. Here we go again, he muttered. Little sister thinks she knows better than everyone else. I took a deep breath, determined not to let him provoke me. I'm simply suggesting we explore options that could secure our future. My father set down his fork, looking at me sternly. Enough, Erica. This isn't the appropriate time or place. I looked around the table, seeing tension etched on everyone's faces. It was clear that no matter how hard I tried, I was still the outsider in my own family. Later that night, I called Rebecca. I don't know how much more of this I can endure, I confessed. It's like talking to a wall. Change is never easy, she replied gently, especially in a place like this. But remember why you're doing this. It's not just for them. It's for everyone who depends on this company, including all the employees whose livelihoods are at stake. Her words resonated with me. She was right. This was bigger than my family's approval or my own ambitions. It was about making a real difference. The next morning, I scheduled a meeting with the board of directors. If I couldn't reach my father directly, perhaps I could appeal to those who had a vested interest in the company's success. With Marcus and Rebecca's support, I presented our comprehensive plan, laying out the data, projections, and tangible benefits. When I finished, there was heavy silence. Then one board member cleared his throat. This is impressive, he admitted. You've given us much to consider. My father looked displeased, but couldn't refute the facts presented. Scott, however, was visibly fuming. After the meeting, my father called me into his office. You're pushing boundaries, he said sternly. Maybe it's time someone did, I replied. I care about this company as much as you do. I'm not trying to undermine you. I want to help secure our future. He studied me for a long moment. You're determined, I'll give you that. Does that mean you'll consider the proposal? I didn't say that, he cautioned, but perhaps it's worth discussing further. It wasn't a victory, but it was progress. As weeks turned into months, momentum began building. The board approved a pilot program to modernize one of our refineries, and initial results were promising. Employees started seeing benefits, and even some traditional executives came around. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I encountered my father in the lobby. Heading home, he asked. Yeah, it's been a long day, I replied. He hesitated before speaking. I wanted to say you've done good work. The board is impressed. I looked at him, surprised. Thank you, Dad. He nodded, the slightest hint of a smile on his face. Perhaps it's time we started working together rather than at odds. For the first time, I felt a genuine connection with him, a glimmer of the respect I'd been striving for. Later that night, I met Marcus to share the news. "Sounds like progress," he said, raising his glass. "Slowly but surely," I agreed. He looked at me thoughtfully. "You know, Erica, you've changed a lot around here, not just with the company, but with people like me who felt unheard." I smiled. "I couldn't have done it without you." He reached across the table and took my hand. "Here's to new beginnings," he said softly. As I looked into his eyes, I felt optimism I hadn't experienced in a long time. Maybe, just maybe, things were starting to fall into place. As months progressed, the changes we implemented at Landstrom Energy began taking shape. The upgraded refinery exceeded expectations, reducing operational costs and significantly improving efficiency. The pilot program's success silenced many board critics, and even Scott had stopped openly dismissing my ideas, though his disdain was still evident in meetings. My father, however, remained enigmatic. While he began including me in more strategic discussions, he still held back from fully endorsing me. I could sense his internal conflict, part pride, part stubbornness, as he wrestled with changing dynamics between us. For every step forward, there seemed to be lingering hesitation, as though admitting I was right meant surrendering something fundamental. One day, Rebecca stopped by my office. "He's testing you, you know," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "I figured as much," I replied, setting down the report I was reviewing. "But what more does he need to see? Results are results." Rebecca smiled knowingly. "It's not just about numbers for him, Erica. It's about trust. You're proving yourself to the board, employees, even the market. But to your father, this is personal. He needs to know you're not just capable of running this company, you're capable of carrying his legacy." I leaned back, letting her words sink in. "And how exactly am I supposed to prove that?" Rebecca stood, smoothing her blazer. "Keep doing what you're doing. Show him you're not here to take over. You're here to lead. There's a difference." Her advice stayed with me as I continued navigating the complex web of corporate politics and family dynamics. Slowly but surely, I began noticing subtle shifts in my father's behavior. He started asking for my input more frequently, occasionally deferring to my judgment in meetings. It wasn't a complete transformation, but it was progress. The turning point came during a quarterly review meeting. One of our largest investors raised concerns about Landstrom Energy's future strategy, questioning whether the company was prepared for the challenges of a shifting energy landscape. Before I could respond, my father surprised everyone by stepping in. "Erica has been spearheading initiatives to address exactly that," he said, gesturing toward me. "Her work on modernizing our refineries and exploring renewables has already shown promising results. I believe her vision is what will carry this company forward." The room fell silent, all eyes on him and then on me. For the first time, I saw genuine respect in his expression, not just for what I'd accomplished, but for who I'd become. After the meeting, as we walked out together, he placed a hand on my shoulder. "You've earned it, Erica," he said quietly. "Every bit of it." Those words stayed with me long after he'd left. They weren't a declaration of total approval or a formal passing of the torch, but they were a start. For the first time, I felt like I belonged, not just in the company, but in his eyes. That night, I sat with Marcus, recounting the moment. "So, what's next?" he asked. "Next," I said, smiling, "I keep going. This isn't the end." A year later, everything had transformed. The board unanimously approved full-scale implementation of the modernization plan, and the company was on a growth trajectory few had anticipated. Investors praised the forward-thinking strategy, and Landstrom Energy began earning a reputation not just as a legacy oil and gas giant, but as a company with an eye on the future. Scott had quietly stepped back from many responsibilities, unable to keep up with leadership demands. He'd moved into a figurehead role, still holding his title, but with little actual influence. My father had stopped shielding him, recognizing that the company's future required real competency, perhaps finally seeing that Scott's entitlement couldn't substitute for skill. One evening, my father called me into his office. It was late, the building quiet except for fluorescent light humming. He sat behind his desk, the weight of decades of leadership evident in his posture. "Sit down, Erica," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. I took a seat, folding my hands in my lap. "What's on your mind, Dad?" He leaned forward, clasping his hands together. "You've proven me wrong," he said simply. "Again and again, you've shown me you have what it takes, not just to succeed here, but to lead." I stayed silent, letting him speak. "I've thought long and hard about this," he continued. "At the next board meeting, I'm stepping down as CEO, and I'll be recommending you as my successor." The words hung in the air, heavy with significance. For so long, this moment had felt out of reach, and now it was here, handed to me not out of obligation, but respect. "Thank you," I said softly, my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. "I won't let you down." He nodded, his expression serious but warm. "I know you won't." When the board approved the transition weeks later, it felt surreal. My name was etched on the CEO's office door, and the responsibilities that came with it weighed on my shoulders. But it was a weight I was ready to carry. That night, as I stood in my office looking out over Houston's city lights, Marcus walked in. "CEO Lundstrom," he said with a teasing smile. "Has a nice ring to it." I laughed, shaking my head. "It feels surreal." He stepped closer, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You fully deserve this, Erica." I turned to him, calm determination settling over me. "This is just the beginning," I said. "The real work starts now." In the years that followed, my father and I found mutual respect we'd never had before, one forged through challenges, trust, and growth. Marcus became my rock, standing by my side as both partner and equal, sharing in the vision of what the company could become. As for Scott, he eventually stepped aside, finding his own path and giving the company the space it needed to thrive. And with that, I stepped forward, ready to lead Lundstrom into a future I had fought relentlessly to shape. Hey there! Did you enjoy the story? If you did, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. It really helps us out and ensures you won't miss any more great stories we share here. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.